Some forbidden places were never sealed by armies. They were sealed by a king's promise, a guardian's vow, a fence in the Nevada desert. Arrows still fly on one beach. An island still holds the ash of its dead in the ground beneath it. And behind that fence, something is still being tested that no camera has ever caught. North Sentinel Island. In November 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to carry him toward a small island in India's Andaman Sea. North Sentinel Island holds one of the last uncontacted peoples on Earth, the Sentinelese, and Indian law bans anyone from setting foot there. Chow had spent close to a decade preparing for this single trip, training as a medic and studying the tribe from a distance. But everything changed when he ignored an earlier warning, an arrow that had already pierced the Bible he was carrying, and returned to the same beach one more time, alone, on November 16th. Fishermen who had brought him watched from their boat the next morning as tribesmen dragged the 26-year-old's body along the sand and buried it. Indian police mapped the shoreline from the water, but could never recover the body. A second landing was judged too dangerous even for a rescue. No one, including the investigators who mapped the beach from a safe distance afterward, can say what happened in the hours between Chow's last step onto the sand and his death. Niihau. The Forbidden Isle. How does a Hawaiian island end up in one family's hands for more than a century and a half? On the western horizon off Kauai sits Niihau, just 17 miles from resort beaches, yet reachable by outsiders only by invitation. Everything traces back to January 23, 1864, when King Kamehameha V completed the sale of the island to a Scottish widow named Elizabeth Sinclair for $10,000 in gold, along with a promise that her family would look after the Hawaiian way of life there. But Niihau's isolation hardened into something stricter when Sinclair's grandson, Aubrey Robinson, shut the island off to nearly all outside visitors in 1915. Sinclair's descendants, the Robinson family, still hold the title today. There are no paved roads on Niihau, no cars, no internet, and Hawaiian remains the everyday language for its roughly 100 residents, spoken nowhere else in the islands with the same daily fluency. Aubrey Robinson's decision has now outlasted him by more than a century, and one family's word to a fading kingdom still keeps an entire island off the map for everyone else. The Lascaux Caves. On September 12, 1940, a teenager named Marcel Ravadat and 3 friends followed a hole left by an uprooted tree near the French village of Montignac and found a cave covered in paintings of bulls, horses, and deer, roughly 17,000 years old. A priest and early archaeologist, Abbot Henri Breuil, arrived 9 days later and confirmed the paintings were genuine, not some elaborate hoax. But everything changed when the cave opened to the public in 1948, and as many as 1,200 visitors a day began breathing, sweating, and lighting the chamber, feeding mold and algae that no Ice Age painter ever had to worry about. Nearly 1 million people passed through in only 15 years. France's culture minister, André Malraux, closed Lascaux for good in 1963, and the original cave has stayed sealed to nearly everyone except a small circle of scientists ever since. If 4 teenagers had never gone looking for a lost dog, the paintings might still look exactly as fresh as the day they were made, instead of a monument now protected mainly by keeping almost everyone out. Mount Athos. In 1046, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine IX Monomachos signed an imperial decree covering a mountain peninsula in northern Greece, home to a community of Orthodox monks going back centuries earlier. The rule it created was called the Avaton, meaning roughly impassable. But everything changed when that decree took permanent hold. Monasteries banned women, girls, and even female farm animals from the peninsula, and later, charters repeated the same ban for hundreds of years afterward, right through Ottoman rule and into the modern Greek state. Today, the ban is written into Greek law itself. Patrol boats keep vessels carrying women well clear of the coastline, and the only recorded exceptions came during wars and epidemics, when refugees of any sex were led ashore. Even female farm animals are covered by the same rule, with cats as the one quiet exception, kept around to deal with mice. Some call it faith-protecting monastic life. Others call it a relic that modern equality left behind. Either way, the prohibition has now held for close to 1,000 years, likely the longest unbroken travel ban left standing anywhere on Earth. Area 51. In April 1955, a small plane circled low over the Nevada desert, carrying a CIA officer and Lockheed's chief engineer, Kelly Johnson, on the hunt for a site secret enough to test a radical new spy plane. Below them lay a dry lake bed called Groom Lake, chosen partly because it sat right next to the government's existing nuclear testing ground, where a curious plane overhead would draw no questions. But everything changed that August, when President Eisenhower personally signed off on the site, and construction crews and Lockheed engineers began moving in under total secrecy, working out of a compound the engineers nicknamed Paradise Ranch. For decades, the government would not even confirm the base existed, and pilots who saw the strange, high-flying test planes glinting overhead helped fuel decades of UFO stories that the CIA was happy to leave uncorrected. Only in 2013 did the agency finally acknowledge the name Area 51 in a declassified history of the program. Even that document only covers what happened up through 1974. What has been tested behind that fence in the decades since has never been declassified at all. Poveglia, the Plague Island. In the Venetian Lagoon, less than a mile from the crowds around St. Mark's Square, sits a 17-acre island that has stood empty for well over half a century. People sheltered there as early as the 5th century, fleeing invasions on the mainland, long before the island took on a darker purpose. From the 1790s, after 2 ships were turned away with signs of plague on board, Poveglia became one of the city's main quarantine posts, a place where the sick were sent, and more often than not, never returned. But the island's fate changed for good once the psychiatric hospital standing on that same ground was shut down in the 1960s, leaving Poveglia abandoned outright. By some estimates, well over 100,000 plague victims were buried or burned there over the centuries, though historians say the specific figure cannot be confirmed and may be inflated well beyond the real toll. What is confirmed is that its buildings are now so unstable that even authorized visits mean picking a careful path around collapsed floors and ceilings. If Venice's other quarantine islands had ever been enough on their own, Poveglia might never have become the one name in the lagoon that people still won't say lightly. Snake Island, Brazil. 33 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state, a forested island barely bigger than a few city blocks rises out of the Atlantic, home to nowhere else on Earth's population of golden lancehead pit vipers. Somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 of them move through the canopy, waiting for migrating birds to land, the island's only real source of food. A lighthouse went up there in 1909, and it was fully automated by the 1920s once its last keepers were gone, so it still runs unmanned today. But everything changed when sailors and later scientists worked out that this island's venom was several times stronger than the same species' mainland relatives, evolved to drop a bird before it could fly off with the poison still in its blood. Brazil eventually locked the island's status in for good, folding it into a protected ecological reserve in 1985 and barring outsiders from landing there at all. Locals still repeat an old, unconfirmed story about the island's last lighthouse keepers. But no legend was needed to justify the reserve. Lancehead genus snakes already cause the vast majority of snakebite deaths across Brazil, and this island holds nothing else. The Chapel of the Tablet. In the Ethiopian city of Axum, beside the Church of St. Mary of Zion, stands a small chapel that only one living person is allowed to enter. By Ethiopian tradition, recorded in the national epic known as the Kebra Nagast, the story reaches back roughly 3,000 years, to when the Ark of the Covenant is said to have left Jerusalem with Menelik, a son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and eventually come to rest in Ethiopia. But everything changed, believers say, the moment that Ark arrived here for good. Today the chapel is said to hold that same relic, watched over by a single guardian monk, chosen for life, who by tradition never leaves the chapel grounds again once he takes the role. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims still travel to Axum every year, especially for the January festival of Timkat, to stand near a building most of them will never see the inside of. Not even the head of the Ethiopian church is allowed inside to see it, So whether the Ark is really there is something no one outside that one guarded room has ever confirmed.